until that was done, the few cars that were on the road pulled up next to a railroad station where they would bring in, usually by rail car, gasoline, be up on stilts. You'd bring your hot car. I'm talking, the first Fords were in the very early 1900s, the A, the N, and then the T by 1908. But you bring your hot car out to this big storage tank, and the way you dealt with it was they always had a gravity flow tank, gasoline tank, so the filler is up here, right? So you take off that filler and you stick a funnel into it. Then inside that funnel they would put a chamois, or some kind of a filtering cloth, because the stuff was dirty, typically dirty. And then the guy would take a known volume bucket, 5 gallons, okay, like this one. Somebody put a nickel in there. So. And take it over to that tank and put 5 gallons into it. Then walk over here, stand up wherever he could on the ladder or on the running board, and pour that gasoline through the funnel into the tank. That was a pretty nasty system, a pretty dangerous system, and there were a lot of accidents. So it was a lot better to have things like the filling station that was away from those big tanks. But the problem was these things were usually right alongside the road. They were curbside delivery filling stations. And there were other kinds of pumps like that tall one you're standing right there by the, yeah, that one right there. It's called a blind pump. This one had a little safer system because it had an underground tank. Okay, a little safer, but usually they were still right next to the curb. And if you think about the brakes in the early 1900s, and you think about the streets in the east, remember how narrow they are? They're not like these big, Utah, Colorado wide streets. They were narrow streets, lousy brakes, and then the cars would have to pull up to that. Well, there were lots of accidents, lots of curbside accidents, and the towns got smart and said, oh no, you take that dangerous system, move it out of town and away from the streets. That's how the gas stations and the filling stations started developing. And one of the problems with these older style pumps was you couldn't see what you were getting. Gas station operators at that time, not like the oil company today, they're all honest, right? They're all honest. These guys you could change that calibration a little bit, so if you thought you were getting a gallon, you might not have been. You might have been getting 95% of a gallon or something. You thought you were getting gasoline, you might have been getting a mixture of gasoline and something else, water, kerosene, whatever. You couldn't tell if it was dirty or clean, which was a much larger problem in the older days. So they went from that kind of a pump to this kind of. These tall ones you'll see around that have visible, these are called visible measure pumps. And because there was so much cheating in the early days, you could also see what you were getting. And the way these things worked was you got the biggest kid in town, usually probably the dumb kind of guy like Sam. And you said, Sam, your job is simple. All you need to do is, if you ever look and see that this thing is full of gasoline, then you run over and there's a handle and you pump like crazy, and out of that underground tank, fill it up, right up to that top bar. And then the customers would come in and say, I would like 5 gallons worth, or 7 gallons worth, or if you had a truck or a big tractor, maybe 10 gallons worth. And then by gravity, you would drain that product, the gasoline down, and if he asked for 7, you'll see he would bring it down until it got right to here. Okay? So then he'd drive, you'd have to calculate a bill. 7 gallons, and today's price is 16.8 cents. It's always been screwy like that. And he'd have to figure out a bill for you, and pay the bill, and you'd drive off, and then Sam would run over and he'd pump that up. And that's the way the visible pumps work. They work very fast. The sun does have a deteriorating effect on gasoline, and so they had, see the blue tint to this pump right here? The blue tint to the glass supposedly to reduce that effect. But you could always see what you were getting, you could see how much you were getting, you could tell if it was clean. And then they started coloring gasoline. Because in the 20s, before the 20s, there was only really one grade of gasoline. It was a low octane, which means it's very explosive, okay, gasoline. You used it in old Model Ts, and you could only have a compression ratio of 4 or 5, typically, to 1. So you had a big engine, not much compression, not a lot of power. Well, in early 1920s, there was an additive discovered called tetraethyl lead. And in a very small quantity, it was inexpensive, very small quantity, like a teaspoonful per gallon, you could add that and raise the octane. So now you could have, what are your, I mean, some of them, my GTO over there, I think it's 11 or 11 and a half to 1, something like that. That high octane gasoline in the Second World War was one of the reasons why our Air Force was successful with some of our airplanes. We got a lot of power out of the engine. After these pumps were in use from about 1915. Well, they were in use. There's still some of these in use on farms, and that's where I found all mine. But most of them were replaced in the early 30s with pumps like this yellow one. It's a clock face pump. Now you got an electric motor in there doing all Sam's work. And a meter that tells you how much gas you've delivered through it. So you still had to buy gasoline by the gallon. 6 gallons, please. Or whatever. You still had to calculate the bill. But you took the drudgery out of it. These things were to pump more product faster. So it was a quicker delivery system. But they only lasted for 2 or 3 years, so they're the hardest things for me to find, these clock face type pumps. Because about 1930, and a couple years later, they developed, if you look at that one, what was it say, Barnsdall fuel, you see all the dials and stuff in there? That's a very complex mechanical computer that's tied to the meter. So now the guy could put into that computer a price per gallon, and then based on how much went through it, a bill. So you could say, okay, your bill today is $3.26 or whatever. And the gas station guys love this because they said, now, can I fill it up for you, sir? They could pump it right up to the top. And don't you remember with those old nozzles that didn't turn off? And they would click it, keep clicking it until they spilled it on your car. Always did that because they were trying to get another couple cents worth of gas out of it. So everybody converted to these mechanical type computer pumps. I like this era of the 30s. This is Art Deco stuff. So like that pump, or this Gilmore, or this Atlantic. I mean, those are Art Deco. Those are just fabulous design pumps in my mind. After the 50s and into the 60s, my interest wanes quickly for lots of reasons. But probably that's enough background and history.